Do you want to learn how I passed the Professional Scrum Master certification with a 100% score? Then keep watching this video because I'll be sharing all my secrets. Hi guys, and welcome to another video, this time on the topic of Agile and Scrum. And I wanted to talk in this video about the Professional Scrum Master certification that I recently took, and I wanted to share with you a couple of tips and tricks on how I managed to pass this certification with a 100% score. Now, I wanted to say just in the beginning, you do not need to have a 100% score in order to pass this certification. Actually, 85% will do just fine. But I wanted to show you in this video a couple of tips on how you can better prepare so that you can pass this exam with 100% confidence. So let's get started. First of all, I wanted to talk about the motivation for taking this exam. I'm generally not a person who likes to have a lot of certifications and stuff like that. But the reason I decided to take this certification was that I noticed when discussing with colleagues on different topics of Agile and Scrum that regarding Scrum there are a couple of things that weren't so clear. You see, from one point of view, it's even in the guides mentioned, Scrum is easy to understand, but it's very hard to master. And this is something that you may not get instantly, but once you start practicing Scrum, you notice there are a lot of things that you might be doing that are not really like in the Scrum book or are not the official things that you should be doing in Scrum. And for that reason, I didn't know exactly what is exactly Scrum, and I wanted to go back to the fundamentals. And to get a bit more motivated in that process, I decided to take the certification. Now, I've been practicing Scrum for the last 4 years as a software developer, but partially as a Scrum Master as well. So I had this practical experience. And during this period, I also attended a lot of Scrum trainings and such, so I was pretty familiar with the entire topic. Nevertheless, I decided to take the certification because I wanted to improve my overall understanding of Scrum. And I saw this certification like the best opportunity to really study the Scrum Guide, to invest some time in better understanding it. Now, as you probably know, or even if you don't know it, the Scrum Guide itself is pretty small. There are, I think, like 15 pages or so. And it's easy to read it once and to say, I think I understand it. It sounds pretty easy. But actually, you can say that the devil is in the details. There are lots and lots of details. But only reading it a couple of times and looking at phrases and rereading stuff, you can really get a better understanding of it. And this is exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to refresh my memory on Scrum. Now, your motivation can be totally different. Maybe you need it for your existing job, or you're planning to get another job as a Scrum Master or as a developer or anything else. And that's totally fine. Now, I wanted to give you a simple heads up because if you're new to Scrum or you haven't done any Scrum in the past, you haven't worked in the Scrum teams or in Scrum projects, I wanted to let you know that just by obtaining this certification, it doesn't mean a lot. So it's a good start to show I have this certification. Where is it? Here's my certification. Okay, great. But without applying everything that is inside the Scrum Guide, everything that you learn is not so valuable. But I just wanted to tell you that having this certification doesn't mean that overnight you become a professional Scrum Master or whatever. So this is just to check the fundamentals, to give you an opportunity to read the Scrum Guide. And if you're just starting with Scrum, it's good to have these fundamentals in your head to understand exactly what Scrum is and how it is intended to work. So what is the Scrum Guide? The Scrum Guide is this document. I printed it out. There are a couple of pages, maybe 15, 17 pages, it doesn't really matter. And you can view it as a piece of legislation. And it actually says on the title, the Scrum Guide, the rules of the game. So it's enforcing the idea that this is like a piece of law. It describes a lot of things that should happen in Scrum and the relationship between them. And you should really understand how this works. Now, as it happens with legislation, it can be a bit abstract sometimes, it can be a bit harder to understand, but nevertheless, you need to study it intensively in order to understand it. And the Scrum And the Scrum Guide is actually at the base of this exam. So you cannot really pass the exam without studying the Scrum Guide. And it's important to not underestimate the Scrum Guide just by the number of pages. I had in the past a lot of exams from entire books and things like that. And I managed to pass them all successfully. But the case with the Scrum Guide is that everything is very condensed. And sometimes you have to really think about things. Why are they like that? And how do exactly they apply? Exactly as I said, like a piece of legislation. You have the theory, you have the piece of legislation, but you also have the reality. And you need to see how exactly does one fit in the other, because a good piece of legislation is a one that has been clearly written and that applies to a lot of practical circumstances. So this is why I'm saying don't get fooled about the size of the Scrum Guide. It's really the devil is in the details. Now, the next question would be, who can take this exam? What are the requirements for taking this exam? And actually, surprisingly, there are no requirements for taking this exam. So anybody can just simply go to scrum.org and simply register for this exam without having any courses or any formal training in this direction. Now, I wanted to emphasize that I would highly recommend that you have a Scrum training if you're really serious about learning Scrum. And an on-site training can be generally very effective. There are typically like 1 or 2 days where you can really get in the basics of Scrum and understand all the processes from a real-life person. Now, typically on-site trainings tend to be a bit expensive, and this might be something that doesn't fit your budget. But there are also a lot of good alternatives. Some are free and some are paid. But with online training, you can really get a good quality education when it comes to Scrum just by watching some videos online. So I will be posting some links in the description and make sure you check them out. And I will highly recommend that you get an understanding of what Scrum is, not only from the Scrum Guide, but from also taking a Scrum course. Additionally, it won't hurt you if you get familiar with the Agile mindset and the Agile Manifesto, and I'll be posting a link in the video description just as well talking about this. Now, let's get back to the practical. What exactly you need to do in order to pass this exam with confidence? And I prepared a couple of tips for you. You can see it as a roadmap. It's my personal suggestion on what you should do, but it's totally up to you what exactly you want to implement. These things worked for me. As I said, I managed to get 100% score on this exam. So let's see what are my tips. So first, if you haven't done that, go to scrum.org and try your first open assessment. This is a short test that you will find online under scrum.org, and it shows how the real questions in the exam will look like. Now, it doesn't mean that the questions that you will get in this short test are the same as the ones you will get in the exam. But trust me, they are pretty similar. Even if you don't know what Scrum is, even if you haven't had 1 hour of training in Scrum, I'll highly recommend that you first do this test, do this open assessment, just to get an idea on where you stand. And if you can, I will highly recommend that you only save the results somewhere, so to know what % of the questions you got right, but don't actually look at the questions to see which one you got right. And the reason for that, and that applies to all the mock tests that you might be doing, when you're practicing tests that are similar to the exam, it's important to test your understanding of Scrum and not to memorize answers and questions, because this can really hurt you in the exam, and it's better to understand what Scrum is and to apply your knowledge than to just memorize on things. And the thing is, if you're looking a lot of results and trying to even if you do not want to, but you will sort of memorize what is the result, what is the outcome of one question, then you will tend to memorize that question and not really get understanding why the question is answered that way or the other. So my advice would be, try to look at the score that you get, then improve your Scrum skills, and only after that, only towards the end, try to look at the exact response that you are getting wrong. But in the beginning, it will help you a lot if you do not waste this open assessments on just memorizing questions. The second step would be to study the Scrum Guide. and I will highly recommend that you print it out. I have it right here, and I actually printed it out, and I have a lot of notes. Everything is written. I try to understand everything that's inside here and to make those notes and to get even more familiar. Now, you can read it online, and there's nothing wrong with that, but if you do not have really the proper tools which allows you to highlight some things or make some notes, I would in this case advise you to stay with a printed version, because you will have the opportunity of getting more familiar with it. And there's another tip I need to give you in this case. The Scrum Guide, it's not about memorizing things. So even if you know the exact phrases in the Scrum Guide, if you do not understand what they mean, then this will not help you in the exam, because what the exam is actually testing is the understanding and applying of these concepts. So it's not just memorizing things from the Scrum Guide. And actually during the exam, you are allowed to have the Scrum Guide open or to access any resources. I don't know of any restrictions in that case. The only problem, as I will get back to it later, is the time. The second thing you need to get familiar is the Scrum glossary. And there you'll find a lot of terms that explain different things. And you should print that out and read it once. It's not more than 1 or 2 pages of terms that you need to be familiar with. So make sure you understand everything, and even if you don't find it in the glossary, but you find it in the Scrum Guide, and you're not sure what the meaning of specific word or term is, then try to do a bit of research to understand the exact meaning of that. Now, in the process of studying the Scrum Guide and reading the glossary, I will highly recommend that you do some notes on your own. And there are multiple ways on how you can do that. You can either write summaries or create a mind map or whatever works for you best. But it's important to sort of write with your own hand the most important things that you think are relevant. And you will see that there are different ceremonials that have different lengths. And maybe there's some information that you cannot remember. You cannot keep them in your head all the time. So it's important to extract the information from the Scrum Guide and put it, you can say it on a cheat sheet, to put it in a compressed way where you can easily access it if you need it. After reading the Scrum Guide a couple of times and understanding what exactly is inside there, it's a perfect time to see what you have learned. And you can now go again to the open assessment and redo the assessment that you did in the beginning. And the idea now would be to test to see how much your understanding of Scrum has improved. And my advice to you would be to not use the Scrum Guide or any other materials while doing this test. And the reason for that is, again, to test your understanding of the Scrum Guide to see what exactly stuck, and again to compare the score that you get in the end to the previous one. And you should get a better score the second time you take this, because now you have studied the Scrum Guide, you know the glossary, and now you should be getting a score that's trending toward passing, and you should get at least 85%. Now, if you're getting below 85%, then I would recommend that you do the open assessment, but this time using the Scrum Guide and looking up the information that you are not sure about. Again, if you can, do not look at the answers, just look at the score and try to see exactly how the score is evolving. Now the next step would be to practice with mock tests. So mock tests are like exam simulators. I will post you in the description below a couple of resources that you can try. Some of them are free, some of them are paid. And this mock test will give you a better understanding on how the exam can look like, and you should target getting more than 85% in all the mock tests that you do. Now, generally the same advice applies here. Do not try to memorize questions. Try to improve your results by studying again the Scrum Guide. Now, the last step should be to register for the exam. And you should only do that when you feel that you are prepared. It makes no sense to give $150 to register for an exam that you may not take for whatever reason. So registering for the exam should be the last step you do. trust me, it's quite easy. They only need your credit card and address information, and it's done in 5 minutes. So don't waste your money registering for the certification before doing the preparation work. So be prepared and then register for the exam. Now, before you actually take the exam, here are a couple of more tips about the exam itself. And the first thing you should be aware is time. Time is very precious, and maybe you've seen it in the mock tests or when doing the open assessment. You have the impression that you have a lot of time. You have maybe the impression that you're finishing all the questions pretty easily and that you have lots of time. And maybe this will be like a surprise to you, but in the exam, you will actually run out of time pretty fast. So keep this in mind when you're doing mock tests. Try to limit the time, and in the exam you have 80 questions that you need to answer in 60 minutes. And if you're doing pretty similar mock tests with 80 questions, instead of 60 minutes, try to limit them like on 40 minutes or even less if you can. And you will see that in the exam, once you have this impression that you do not have enough time, this is a very uncomfortable feeling to have. So be prepared for the feeling of not having enough time, and prepare for this in advance if you can while doing the mock tests. While taking the exam, you have the possibility of marking some questions for review. Now, you might have the tendency during the exam to be unsure about a lot of questions, but I just wanted to warn you that it's not realistically that you will be able to review at the end more than 5 or maybe 7 questions. So be careful what you select for review, because if you have like more than 10 questions, you will not be able to review them. And if you do not mark the questions where you are really unsure about the answer, you will probably waste your time review questions where you already got the right answers or stuff like that. So be careful what you choose to review. My recommendation is 5 to 7, no more than 5 to 7 questions. And anything else, try to sort it out in the first try. Again, on the topic of time, try not to waste time. Again, you will not have a lot of time. And what I actually had during the exam is, even if I had a pretty good internet connection, the website where I was taking this test was pretty slow. So every time when I was clicking the next question, I think there were like 5 seconds it took for the next page to load. And actually, if you look like 80 questions and 85 questions, if you have a couple of questions that you need to review, and even this review process, jumping to questions that you previously seen, is really time consuming. So if you take like 85 questions and multiply them by 5 seconds, you will get like more or less 7 minutes or something like that. It's almost 10 minutes just waiting for the website to load. So for 60 minutes, you can say that 10 minutes is wasting on just loading the web page. So if this is something that you cannot control, try to control your time while doing the question. So don't waste any time. Don't disconnect yourself from the test or anything like that. Try to be as focused as possible. Have everything near you if you need it. Have the Scrum guide, have your mind map or whatever notes you have a glass of water or a piece of chocolate or anything like that. Do not waste any time. Time is really precious and you really do not have it. For this exam, you really need to use your mind and to have a good understanding. And your mind needs to be fresh. So I would recommend you to take this exam somewhere in the morning or the part of the day where you have the most energy and that you are rested and fresh and really up for this exam. So don't do it somewhere in the evening where you're tired after a day of work or something like that. I actually took my exam on a Sunday and it was pretty good and my mind and body was totally rested, and this had a major contribution to the perfect result that I got. During the exam, it's important to read the questions carefully. And you might get the impression that maybe you know some of the questions from the mock tests or that they look pretty similar, but it's important to read every question, to read every answer, and only after reading the question and the answers and making sure you do not miss any words, that you should select the right answers. Don't just jump and say, oh, I know the answer to this one, or I think I've read the first and second answer, it's the second one, and not bothering to read the third, fourth, and fifth one. This is a big mistake. Read the question, make sure you understand it, read it out loud if you think it helps, or read it slowly, look at every word, make sure you understand what's the meaning of it. Don't just scan it quickly and think that you understood everything. Read word by word and make sure you do not miss everything. And also regarding reading, there are some things like, you need to understand the meaning of the question. And even if it sounds familiar, it may have a different meaning. And especially words like can or may can totally change the meaning of the question. So be careful when reading the question. That's about it. I wish you good luck in the exam. Hopefully you will pass it with a good score. And if you did that and have some tips, just leave a comment in the section below. Let me know how you managed to pass the exam. What were your tricks? What was your strategy? How did you prepare for the exam? And additionally, as I said during the video, read this video description because I'll be posting a lot of links to resources that you need in order to pass this certification. Guys, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, if you find it helpful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and let me know how your certification went. See you next time.